evening to everyone who's joining us tonight. It is the second of 3 artist talks for Photowork 2021 at the Barrett Art Center, and I am Joanna Frang. I am the Executive Director at the Barrett Art Center, and I'm really excited to not just have some artists with us tonight who are being shown and featured in this exhibition, that we also have a guest moderator, so we get to have someone else's head in the little square on your screen tonight, who has a lot of experience in media and photographic art. So the artists who are with us tonight are some of the 40-odd artists who were selected to show in this exhibition by Audrey Sands, who is the curator of photography at the Phoenix Museum of Art and the Center for Creative Photography. And we're just really excited to have all 3 of these artists with us tonight. And I think you'll see a theme develop as everyone speaks. And as this moderator, which we have tonight, Paul Thompson, one of the reasons that we invited Paul tonight is because he is the director of the Spark Media program at the Artifact, which is a regional arts nonprofit organization here in Poughkeepsie that really empowers young people to find their creative voice. So he has done that work in kind of helping train the next generation of artists, photographers who then might, for example, go on to be in Photowork or other shows like Photowork. So we'll hear more from him about that tonight. And the other reason is because the Artifact is soon hosting the Real Expressions International Teen Film and Photography Festival, which has youth-produced short films and photography from around the world. And their show deadline for submissions is February 13th. So if you know any up-and-coming photographers or filmmakers, I think this is a perfect kind of way that our 2 programs based out of Poughkeepsie really mesh together. And so I just really wanted to give that a plug. So tell someone you know who is a youth to check it out on the Artifacts website. But I will hand everything over to Paul for the rest of the evening. Everyone is in excellent hands. And for that, I am going to just sign off and hand it over to Paul. So, Paul.
Hi, good evening, everybody. As Joanna mentioned, my name is Paul Thompson, and I work with the Artifact here in Poughkeepsie, New York. The Spark Studios program has multiplied and formed throughout the years, but the current version of it is amazing because we usually focused on just video work and production, and just recently last year, and due to the pandemic and not being able to work with outside actors and get in locations, we went and focused on photography for a good 2 sessions. And it was a blessing because we were able to have our students be more well-rounded, and they can, really see, all right, this camera we know can do great things with video, but what else can it do? What was it really meant for? You know what I mean? So this is an amazing webinar. I'm glad to be a part of. The artists you're gonna hear from today have some amazing work. Just going through it, I was very inspired, and I was like, oh, I wanted my students to try this, and they all were awesome. So I'm excited for you all to hear from them today. Yeah, enough about me. We're gonna start off with our first artist for the evening, Karey Walter from Marietta, Georgia. You want to come on over and tell us?
Yeah, I'd love to come on over. So I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for such an amazing show. And I'm going to go ahead and share with you really where this project came out of and the work that was created from the image that I have in the exhibition. So let me go ahead and present here. Can you guys see everything okay? Paul, we good? Right. So I started a project 2.5 years ago which I called the Kudzu Project. And it really came about with the fact that I was traveling a lot from Georgia. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. And I was teaching in Seattle. So I was like taking these really long stretches of time to look at the American West and kind of explore. And before I started this project, I was really kind of encapsulated with photographing exotic animals really in the South. And I went out west and I went to Colorado, and I just started making like this list of these animals that I felt like I really needed to photograph. And so this is a white buffalo that I photographed in Colorado, and I wanted it for the symbolism and really for, you know, the mysticism of this particular animal. But what I found is that when I was in Seattle, I was becoming really kind of homesick for the South. And there were two things that were going on in my mind. One was kind of like this lawlessness of like wanting to go back to Georgia, being in Seattle. And then the other thing, the metaphor that came to mind was like this kind of old, like turn of the century backdrop. And I wanted it to be kudzu because I wanted it to symbolize this sense of overgrowth and, you know, kind of the human impact for these animals. And so I started developing this series called the Kudzu series. And it really went where I wasn't just photographing within the state of Georgia. Like this was actually taken in London, near where my grandmother grew up. And kind of these just white symbolic animals kept appearing in front of me. And I really wanted this turn of the century backdrop. And so with the kudzu, this can seem a little complicated, is that I photographed the kudzu on film. So I actually worked with a 4x5 camera and then did some compositing. So it's really a combination of like analog and digital and kind of this weird emergence of process that was important for me. And then I was spending a lot of time on Cumberland Island, which is a barrier island off the state of Georgia. And it's really pretty wild and pristine, and you don't have like stores or, you know, like an interstate or anything. And whenever I go there, I find like the remnants of these animals. So this is the skull of a white-tailed deer, and really kind of playing off of, you know, this sense of not only, I mean, I just think that the show itself, like dealing with the aspect of intimacy and identity, I'm kind of looking at that from the perspective of what is left behind or what we value, primarily with animals. And I travel a lot throughout the South. So I, you know, COVID's changed a lot of things, unfortunately, but I spend a lot of time in Georgia and South Carolina and in Texas. Those are kind of like my key states that I love to go and photograph. And this is a white mule that I photographed in South Carolina. And then I also deal, because I want the intimacy of photographing these animals. Like it's, you know, I want to be next to them. I want to see their eyes. I want, you know, I'm like really kind of arm's length away. And so this is a fawn rescue in South Carolina. And the one thing that catches my eye are things that are really unusual. And so this particular image is of a piebald deer, which is a combination of an albino and a whitetail together. And then on top of it, genetically, this particular deer is also dwarfed. So it has a lot of genetic kind of, you know, funky stuff going on with it. But this deer, I think, is like 5 or 6 days old. So I'll spend a lot of time with rehabbers and people who are trying to work with exotic animals to get them back into nature. And they really kind of spend their whole life wanting to rescue these animals and to make sure that they have the land and the community that they need to sustain themselves. And this is my favorite deer. I actually go and visit him every year, and he is a full albino white-tailed deer. And his name is Casper, and he lives in East Texas. And this is one particular rancher who breeds exotics, but is not having people come on the land or the ranch to kill the animals. So a lot of people have like, you know, this idea that everyone in Texas, if you go see deer, that people are just killing them. He's actually really very passionate and is in love with these animals and actually bottle raises them. And so I try to visit this particular deer once a year. And I started photographing him when he was maybe 2 months old. And so he's 2 years old in this image, but just so magical. Like, I can't get enough of him. I just want to eat him up. He's like so beautiful to me. And this is the image that I actually have in the exhibition, you know, at the Barrett Art Center. And, you know, the other animal, I kind of daydream about animals that I want to photograph. And, you know, the white owl, the barred owl is really quite beautiful to me. And I kind of, you know, when I was working with this animal, I really wanted him to kind of be in flight and that sense of movement. So this was actually about a 2-hour photo shoot where I went to an owl rescue, and like I literally spend time with the animals. It's not like I'm out in the woods hoping that something happens. I mean, it's very intentional when I'm photographing. And this is a horse skull on Cumberland Island. And the thing about Cumberland Island is that, you know, it was an island that was bought by the Carnegie family. So you have these old ruins and, you know, the fact that there was a lot of wealth on that island at one point. But the one thing that's still on the island is they have a lot of wild horses. So I love to go and photograph there because they're very, you know, untamed. And I like that aspect of nature, like things kind of, you know, you have this concept of man coming in and structuring everything, but I also like the fact that there's the part of it that things start to fall apart, and there's also this remnants of nature that we find in the environment. So this is a yearling. This is just a white-tailed deer, and I mentioned before, I have been spending more time in South Carolina just because I can drive there and it's easier. But the rescue itself, like I can be right next to the deer. I mean, it's really this very intimate relationship that I have with the animals. And then this is an axis deer. So there are a lot of, you know, like part of this project, you become like a specialist with whatever it is you're photographing. And so this is an axis deer, meaning that the deer always has its spots. So we normally see like a fawn and they have their spots and then they fade away as they get older. And you can see here, I try to go at different seasons with their antlers. So here we have like this soft antler, but just a really beautiful example of this animal, and then kind of setting it in this turn of the century backdrop. And my choice of black and white is really personal just because I shoot a lot of black and white film. I still do a lot of analog work. And for me, I just have this aesthetic with black and white imagery. So that's all that I have to share with you guys. So I appreciate you all taking the time and looking at the work.
Wow, amazing. This is very fascinating. I know I have a question. So you mentioned that like you don't just show up and you these deer the animals trust you. How do you build that relationship? Is it like once you get there one day? I know you visit them several times, but does it take a couple of visits for you to be able to work with these animals?
Yeah, it takes a couple of visits, and it takes me kind of doing the legwork and research. And what I like to do is I'll kind of daydream about the animal that I want to photograph, and then I find that animal. And then I have the negotiation with whoever owns the animal and explaining that I need to be alone with the animal. Like there's this sense of intimacy that I need. And I've never, you know, I'll tell you, like people are really lovely. I've never run into a major like stop sign where people are like, no, you can't do this. I think a lot of people who are rehabbing animals and are really dealing with environmental issues have a compassion. So I think once I show them the work, they're really excited to see what I come up with.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's almost like this is like professional photos for the animals for them to like use on their professional social media or something like it's just so well done. So I know if I was in class with my students and they would ask questions, they would probably ask, how were you able to composite those photos? Like the turn of the century backdrops, mixing those with the animals. Are you using a certain program or is it,
Well, the backdrop itself, like the kudzu, the backdrop, I actually photographed with 4x5 film. So I actually went throughout South Georgia and found like the most beautiful kudzu that you could find. And I photographed that separately. And then when I photograph the animals, I do that digitally because I mean, I have to, they're just so squirrely. I just can't slow down with them. And so then what I'm doing is going in and compositing these two images together in Photoshop and really wanting it to look, like you're kind of giving the respect to the animal with this isolated backdrop. So it's very intentional to have that kind of romanticized look.
Great. We have a question from Lou Benjamin. Are there any equipment constraints? So like you have to have a quiet shutter, to use mirrorless cameras just to not spook the animals or to make them feel comfortable?
No, that's a great question. I actually do use a Sony mirrorless, and the shutter does make a major difference, especially like the one animal that I went and photographed in Minnesota, I went and photographed foxes because I was like mesmerized with foxes. And the weird thing with an animal like that, it's not only the sound of the camera, it's literally like every move that you make, they freak out. So for some animals, you really have to kind of sit and be with them for an extended amount of time. And usually I spend about 2 or 3 days on each assignment.
All right. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure everyone else enjoyed it as well. Thank you for joining. I know you have to head out a little earlier, but yeah, we look forward to seeing your work at the
Thanks,
show.
Paul.
Okay. All right. So our next speaker for the evening is someone that I'm familiar with. My first year at Spark, actually my first class at the Artifact when it was called Spark Media Project. This person was one of the senior students there and really helped me. I always say I learned so much from the students and from my job, and I know that I learned a lot from Samantha Brinkley, even though she was a student at the time. So I'm really glad to see Sam's work. And that fact that I got into this exposition and also that you're doing a bunch of other artist talks. So our next speaker is Samantha Brinkley from Rhinebeck, New York.
Hello, welcome. Thank you, Paul. That was a very sweet introduction. So yeah, hi, I'm Samantha Brinkley. I'm living in Rhinebeck, but I'm actually from Poughkeepsie. So like in my heart of hearts, this is like a hometown show for me. All right, let me get my presentation up real quick. This is going to be a very, it's going to seem sort of like an academic presentation. It's very research based because this project is from my senior project at my undergraduate at Purchase. So I put a lot of research behind this project and I like to kind of present it that way. One, because looking at it from sort of a academic perspective helps me not lose my mind over it from a personal sense. And also just because I like to show the evidence of what I'm working against so people know what I'm talking about. So the project is called Barely Legal. Before I get into it, tiny quick bit about me. Graduated from SUNY Purchase in 2019 with a Bachelor of Science in Visual Arts. I also studied gender studies and art history when I was there. That usually tends to feed into the art itself. I live and work in Rhinebeck, New York, and my photography is like the process itself is just standard digital based photography. It's usually more conceptually or in the editing that my process comes out. So first, what is Barely Legal? I'm going to give a brief like trigger / content warning for discussions of sexualizing children, child pornography, pornography in general, sexual assault. So if that upsets anyone, completely understand. I just want to put that out there before I begin. So Barely Legal is my series in which I try to expose and fight against the normalization of pedophilia in our media. So like movies, TV, music, advertisements. Anyone who's been alive for any amount of time would know that youth is sort of like gold in our culture. It's very much the gold standard for beauty. You know, it's very taboo for people to age, especially women to age. Youth is always seen as the ideal. And so progressively in society, we're entering an age where younger girls are looking older and older with time, you know, especially with the influx of like Instagram influencers. So they're being encouraged to dress older and older all the time. Meanwhile, older women are constantly being encouraged to use like Botox and like anti-aging creams. And essentially what all of this is doing is trying to normalize attraction to children, because if children are looking like adults and adults are looking like children, then where do you draw the line? You know, like how can you say what's right and what's wrong? And the name Barely Legal comes from an actual porn magazine and porn website, where the basic premise is that you take basically like a just turned 18-year-old girl and she'll like lose her virginity on camera. And she's usually propped with like a teddy bear or like a lollipop or something like that. And so keeping that in mind, how I just described that, I'm going to show you some examples from not from the porn itself, but from media that reflects it. And so these are some photo shoots from Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. So like I said, posed with teddy bears, schoolgirl uniform. So it's very similar to the actual pornography. And so I'm going to read this quote from this reading from Meredith Lavande. Part of the initial allure of Britney Spears and Jessica Simpson was their hypersexed image coupled with their virginity pledges. It appears that the virgin title covered up their seductive images, yet it was the virgin appeal that made them seductive. Their sexual innocence was a symbolic metal hymen. It existed so the viewer could violate it. As music videos showcase Catholic schoolgirl uniform shirts that spontaneously fly open while bearing midriff, Barely Legal flies off the shelves. And since children and teenage girls especially look up to these pop stars for guidance, if they're dressing this way and trying to appeal to older men, then those teenagers will want to as well. And this was as recently as September of 2020. The clothing line Fashion Nova came out with a line for children, and these were some of the photos that were released. And so I don't need to tell you that it's disgusting, but it's very upsetting. You can see that the girl in the middle, her skirt is like practically almost completely up her thigh. And it's like, why can't children just look like children? You know, like why do children need to be appealing to older men? They should just be kids. And so here are some other examples. The top photo shoot is from the 90s, but the bottom with Millie Bobby Brown was a couple years ago for Pandora. And I'm going to read another quote. So this one says, "A girl child displaying herself is loaded." Whoops. Hang on. Sorry, my computer just freaked out on me. And we're back. Okay. So a girl child displaying herself is loaded with sexual connotations regardless of the child's knowledge or intentions. And often the creator of an image structures it sexually out of habit rather than malevolence. An image of a girl can be encoded with sex easily through the simple coy tilt of a head or open-mouthed pout, requiring no great effort or planning on the part of either videographer, photographer, or child. And so basically what this quote is saying is that because we've seen so many sexualized images of women and children, things that are inherently non-sexual become sexualized through repeated exposure. And so you can see in that bottom photo, you know, the simple tilt of the head, she's like biting on the necklace. And so even though the person behind the photo shoot might not have been consciously thinking, oh, I want Millie Bobby Brown to look sexy, because she's seen so many images like that throughout her time, it subconsciously projected itself onto the child. And obviously, of course, older women constantly being told to look younger because you want to look as close to a child as possible. You know, that's why you shave your pubic hair. That's why you use Botox. That's why you want to keep up with the young, hip clothing trends. And so some of the effects of this, so normalizing large age gap relationships. So popular media like American Beauty, the famous movie with a known predator in it, or TV shows like Pretty Little Liars will normalize and sometimes romanticize large age gap relationships. And some of our most idolized celebrities throughout our lifetime have also dated minors and are still considered idols. So for example, Elvis met his wife when she was 15 and he was 25. Jerry Seinfeld dated a high schooler when he was 39. Leonardo DiCaprio dated a 21-year-old he knew since she was 11. And he also just has a knack for dating 20-year-olds. And then Drake will often befriend teenagers and then date them when they're 18. And he's currently friends with Millie Bobby Brown and will text her boy advice. And then music like the Beatles, she was just 17, you know what I mean? The Knacks, My Sharona, Aerosmith. Rock and roll generally just has a culture of preying on young girls, but these are just examples of how these things often go unnoticed or even romanticized in our society. And then other effects, a 2004 study showed that viewing barely legal pornography caused associations of sexualized words with non-sexual images of children. So think back to the Millie Bobby Brown photo shoot, because it's that same idea. It makes you think of a child sexually, even if the image itself is non-sexual. And then several studies have found that those who are exposed to sexualized images of women and children are more accepting of rape myths, sexual harassment, sexual stereotypes, interpersonal environments, and adversarial sexual beliefs about relationships. And those adversarial beliefs have been linked to sexually aggressive behaviors. And then for individual women and girls who are exposed to these kind of imagery and this kind of encouragement to look younger or older, there's more chance to have an eating disorder or an eating disorder symptom, general lower self-esteem, depression and anxiety, very early cigarette smoking, and diminished sexual health and habits. And so now that I've gotten through all the academic stuff, now we're going to talk about my work. So this is one of the photos that's in the show. It's, I think, the only photo in the series that's not physically my body. Every other photo you'll see will be of me. But this was like very early on in the project, so that's why it's not me. But that kind of, you know, like dirt on the knees with the playful pink nail polish kind of gives the idea of like the soiling of innocence or like the deflowering, and sort of that very blurry, ambiguous in between of like child and adult, and like not knowing how to transition between ages because there's no strict age differences anymore. Like there's no rite of passage or anything like that. And then some examples from popular clothing stores that have like sexualized slogans on them. I see a lot of shirts that say like daddy's girl and stuff like that. This is, again, is another example of, you know, like how women are encouraged to shave and pluck and peel, and just all the ways that we have to like hurt ourselves and like maim ourselves and other ourselves just to be seen as attractive, and who we're looking attractive for, and why we look attractive to them, and why do we even want to look attractive to them. Another example, you know, encouraging to think of yourself as like, just a little baby girl. And then this is, it's funny, hang on, I actually have this doll right here. And I was looking at her one day and I noticed that she had this red underwear on underneath. And I was very taken aback when I saw that, because I was like, when in my childhood did I buy red underwear for my Build-A-Bear? And why was that even available? And so I was just thinking about that. And that really just struck me as like, how long in my life, like how early in my youth did I already start thinking of myself as a sex object to like want to buy red underwear for my Build-A-Bear? Like how long has it been embedded in my head that like I'm young, that which means men find me sexy, like certain men find me very attractive because I have a young face. And so that always kind of disturbed me very much. And then, you know, like the idea of being like a very sweet, like candy girl, things like that. And then this is the photo that won second place for Jurors Prize, which I'm kind of shocked by, because the way that this photo came about was that I took a nap. I took a nap, and when I fell asleep with my bra on, and when I woke up, I was in like horrible pain. And your bras normally cause pain, but this was like a lot. And I saw that it had like seared itself into my side, and I was like just so taken aback. And it just like as soon as I saw that gash, it just made me think of like all of like the extra push-up bras and like wearing the super tight clothing, and like just the ways that like women and girls are always just trying to like shape and like mold and like fit themselves to be like this ideal of like youth and attraction for men. And so I thought that was a really good symbol of that. And then these two they're not like a diptych, but I put them in here because they're both vertical, but I do think they feed off of each other pretty well. You know, like the idea of the clothing that's advertised to you, again with the bra motif, the feeling of like being like a terrorist of your own body, or like your body has been terrorized by other people and has been either invaded physically or by people's eyes, or feeling like you're trying to like fit into this mold that you just can't escape from. Feeling that, you know, like the right one I like to call puberty, because I imagine it's like girls trying to escape their like girlhood and enter womanhood as fast as possible as like a way to obtain power, but it doesn't end up making them any stronger because they're still looking towards men for like admiration and like validity. And then again, going with the motif of the stuffed animals, you know, trying to emulate some of the images I saw from that barely legal website, you know, posing them with the stuffed animals. But this is kind of trying to go with the more like realistic aspect of it, where it's like, well, it's not really this romantic thing where you go and you lose your virginity. It's like people are getting abused and like killed because of websites like that, and like because it makes fathers want to act out on their children or whatnot. And then these last three are some of the newer works in the series where I'm including more of my face, because I did feel that the project was getting a little too impersonal. And the project did originate from me, like, because I do have a very young looking face, and like I'm often mistaken for being a minor. And so it's been me struggling with like feeling that I'm like 20, like I'm about to be 24, like trying to actually feel my age and like find a way to like look like confident and like look attractive in a way I want to, um, without like constantly fearing that like whatever man finds me attractive is going to secretly be a pedophile because he thinks I'm a child. And so me putting these sort of like childhood stickers on my face with these slogans from the Barely Legal magazine was my way of kind of trying to like show the way that men have looked at me have been imprinted like on me and my own fears. And again, that juxtaposition of like the childhood like text, this one obviously the metaphor being eye candy, and just feeling again the constant barrage of like men looking at me and thinking I'm a child and liking me because of that and not just because of me. And then jailbait, a common thing. If you don't know what jailbait is, it's like a younger woman who like goes after an older man, and if he's caught with her, he'll go to jail. So you're like, oh, that's jailbait. And that's pretty much everything I had to show. I just quickly put my links up here at the end. But yeah, that's everything I had to show today. So thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. Thank you for bringing up a topic that, you know, definitely needs to be talked about more. I know with here at the Artifact, we always try to preach media literacy, and something like this would be very important for not just my students, but all students to start to recognize. I know Mary Ellen will be very proud of this presentation. And my question for you is, you know, what's your typical planning process like? So I know you mentioned there was like one time you just looked at your teddy bear, your Build-A-Bear, and noticed that it had red underwear on. Does that, is that how you get most of your inspiration? Or is it kind of mixed with like, you know, the first shot where it was like it looks like you planned it out and like, you know, something that you created?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of them are more, the first one, it actually looks planned, but that one was actually very spontaneous because I was hanging out with a friend and she fell down and she got dirt on her knees, and I was like, wait, and I like had her stand on a bench. And then yeah, with the Build-A-Bear one, I happened to see the red. But even when I did see the red, it works that the same way that most of them do, which is that they're like pre-planned. So for some of them, like the photos in the mall or of the magazine, like I'll purposefully go out and I'll like look for evidence of these things. But then for the ones that are more like staged, like the mark on my side, or like the Build-A-Bear, or like me in the closet, those like are usually like I'll think about them ahead of time, and sometimes I'll sketch them out. A lot of the times what I'll do is I'll actually look at barely legal covers, or I'll actually look at the actual porn, or just like advertisements like the ones I showed you, and I'll try to like sort of parallel them or like emulate the motifs that I see in them. And so like for again, like so for the one of me in the closet, like stuffed animals are like often used in those videos. And so I was thinking like, okay, like what can I do with the stuffed animals to kind of like subvert the trope? And I was like, oh, like I'll like cover my like naked decapitated body with them and hide in a closet. And so yeah, so some of them are spontaneous, but then a lot of the times they're me sketching them out based off of evidence that I've looked at in media.
And was there like a particular moment where you realized these tropes and these like you know, exactly all these things that you were talking about in media? Like,
yeah, so when I originally was working on this project, it was more about like just like why I didn't feel like an adult. So it started with age transition, and then it sort of slipped into just like representations of women throughout art history, and I was sort of going that route. And so I was doing like a lot of like academic research on like history of women depicted with flowers and like as angels. And then like the more readings I did, like I think the first one I saw that was different was about Lolita, like the book Lolita, and like Lolitas in media. And so I read that and I was like, that's interesting. And so then I kept like doing these readings, and like the more I read them, the more I realized that that was what the problem I had been facing all my life was like, oh, I feel I'm struggling with looking older because I've been told all my life that me looking young is a good thing. Because like when I would tell like if I was complaining to like an older woman, right, and I was like oh, I hate that people think that I'm a minor. Like, I really wish like people would think that I'm my age. They'll be like, oh, well, when you're 50, you'll look 30. And so isn't that great? And I was like, I guess that's not really like a priority for me. Like, I'd rather not have men look at me creepily. And so like once I started viewing those readings and then started looking at examples, like I realized that like that was the root source of it all. And I was like, I need to talk about this.
have you found like has your work like kind of opened the eyes to maybe some young children or females, even older people? Has that ever happened before?
I certainly hope so. I don't think many children have seen the work just based off of where it's been shown. And if children were to see the work, I think I would want them to be very much like prepared ahead of time for what they were going to see. But in terms of like, I have had some like older women talk to me about it and say that like they understood like the pressure to like look young. And then I've had some people my age who have been like, yeah, like I noticed that like lots of people my age or like my younger siblings are starting to fall down this route. And then I've had a couple men too who have come up to me and told me that the work moved them. So yeah, I've had some feedback on it. Hopefully more.
Great job. Amazing. And congratulations on winning second. It was a Juro's Prize.
Thank you. It's very shocked.
Oh, you shouldn't be. This is amazing. All right. So thanks, Samantha. So our next and final speaker for the evening is from Scarsdale, New York. Her name is Sharon Draghi. Sharon?
Yeah, hi everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for tuning in tonight and thank everyone at Barrett for putting together this amazing exhibition. I'm really happy to be part of it. So I'm gonna do my presentation and start off talking about the two photographs that I have in the show, and then I'll show you some other photographs from that body of work. And then I'm gonna switch it up and show you some new things that I've been working on, which are since the pandemic started. So let me share my screen. Hang on. Whoops, 1 second. You know what? 1 second, because it looks like I lost my, Here we go. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the two photographs that I have in this exhibition come from a body of work called See Me, Consider Me, I Won't Be Erased. And this is a woman's portrait project that I started working on a couple of years ago. So one of the themes of this exhibition at Barrett is reinvention. And I'm glad that these photographs were included. This is Morgan. Now I'm sorry, guys, having some trouble with the, 1 second. Sorry, Morgan and Natalia. Here we go. Okay, now we'll start. So as I was saying, these photographs are from See Me, Consider Me, I Won't Be Erased, a woman's portrait series. And I made these portraits with the aim of offering an alternative to the way that we as a society look at women. My idea was to photograph women of different ages and backgrounds in their homes. And the goal was to offer an alternative to the male-oriented way that women are often photographed. I think there's a dominant and ever-present male gaze. This is the way that men look at women and the way that we as a society have been traditionally used to seeing women depicted. And this male way of seeing is so prevalent in our culture. We see it in advertising, we see it on TV and the movies and the workplace, where women are too often objectified, they're categorized, sexualized. We're seen in relation to a defined social role, and that's traditionally been one of a wife, a mother, or an object of desire. And I'm not trying to say that portraying a woman's sexuality is a bad thing. It's just that so often when you see these photographs, they're not empowering. So my goal here in making these portraits was to make introspective, intimate, and quiet portraits taken at home. So I'm going into these women's homes because I think environment provides a context to who we are, how we live. The home's an intimate space. And through these portraits, I'm addressing the idea of beauty and how beauty is defined. And this project is political, but it's also really personal to me because I'm also talking about the idea of invisibility. And there's this thing that happens when women grow older, and I've experienced it myself, where one starts to feel more and more invisible. It's almost like you're disappearing. People don't look at you in the same way that they did before. They don't seem as interested in finding out who you are. And like Samantha said, it's not like I liked it when men were looking at me, but it's really weird when you feel like all of a sudden no one's interested in you anymore. They're not really seeing you. They're not asking you questions about yourself. It's like all of a sudden you've passed from this interesting person to, I don't know, older woman. So I read a bunch of feminist literature to try to put my ideas in context. And I found this quote by Rebecca Solnit, and it's from a book called Men Explain Things to Me. And it goes like this, and I think this quote really exemplifies the ideas that I wanted to put out in this project. And it's, some women get erased a little at a time, some all at once, some reappear. Every woman who appears wrestles with the forces that would have her disappear. She struggles with the forces that would tell her story for her or write her out of the story. The genealogy, the rights of man, the rule of law. The ability to tell your own story in words or images is already a victory, already a revolt. So for me, these portraits are my attempt to take control of the narrative and to ask the viewer to really look at these women, look deeper, and hopefully connect with them in some way. I want the viewer to pay attention to these women. I don't want them to be overlooked. So when I began this project, I started photographing women I knew, family members and friends. And then I started photographing people I didn't know, friends of friends and people who were referred to me. So in these two portraits that are in the exhibition, Morgan and Natalia, I'm thinking specifically about issues like identity, body politics, and challenging traditional notions of femininity. So Morgan, I didn't know Morgan at all when I went to photograph her. I met her through a mutual friend. And this photograph was taken shortly after her, I think her second gender reassignment surgery operation. So she's pictured here in her kitchen. She has a beauty care company. So the vials that you see on the counter are face serums. So I met her, we talked, she opened up to me, she told me her story about her long journey to physically become a woman and the impact that that choice had had on her family and friends. And also we talked a lot about the physical and the emotional challenges that she had to face. And it was really incredible. And I spent about 2 hours with her, 2 or 3 hours. And then I made this picture and I wanted it to show her determination, her strength, but also her vulnerability. Natalia is also someone who I had never met before. She's a friend of a friend. And I went to her house and it was over the summer. Again, my process is very slow, especially when you don't know someone and you don't know where they live and what that looks like. But I went there, I spent some time talking to her. We had a little like lunch together. And then I just started photographing. And again, like 2 or 3 hours, I tried a lot of different things, inside, outside. And I got home and I looked at the photographs I made and they just like were not it. Because I didn't know her and I realized that the thing I wanted to say about her, I just wasn't able to say. So basically, I got in touch with her like a month or 2 months later, and I asked if I could come back and photograph her. And then we made this image together. And it was hard because, you know, she's vulnerable, she's in her bathtub. And my goal was really to portray her in an intimate way, in a sensual way maybe, but not as an object, not as a sexual object. So let me show you some of the other photographs, some of the other women that I photographed for this body of work. This is Jeanette, who's a friend of mine, good friend of mine. Anna, Carolina, Zeno in her dorm room. Zeno is a good friend of my son's. And here, this is my mom. And this is probably one of the hardest photographs that I've made because my mom she's very self-conscious and she wants to look really good and she's very aware of the camera. And I've tried to photograph her a number of times and it was hard and it didn't really work. But I don't know, I got there and I got her to open up and reminisce, and we started talking about the family and we started talking about my grandmother, and she kind of went out of herself and was not as aware of the camera. And so I was able to make this photograph of her. This one was also a difficult photograph to make. This is someone who I've known since I was a teenager. And she's been really, really ill for like the past 10 years. She's on a lot of medication. And basically her whole life has shrunk to her bedroom. She didn't go out and she spends most of her time in bed with her animals watching TV. And so I was really conscious when I was making this image. I wanted to show her life, but I wanted there to be some dignity there. I didn't want to portray her in a bad light. So I'm hoping that I was able to do that. And she really liked this image. This is Maxine, Olivia, Sandra. We did a lot of play acting here. I came over and she said, what should I wear? I have a couple of outfits in mind. And I'm like, let's go. And she put on that amazing gown with the gloves. And I just thought it was so powerful and beautiful. And that was really a joy. And this is to Tanya. So that's the end of the women series. I'm just showing you, I'm also interested in men and intimacy as well. So that's part of my practice too, which is why I'm bringing up a couple of other images of my husband in the bathtub, my son, my other son. And so this brings me to here, pandemic. So basically, you know, when COVID hit and the pandemic started, I wasn't able to go to women's homes anymore and make work. But I really felt a need to be creative and to express myself. And I was, you know, terrified. So I started making self-portraits, and I put together a project of self-portraits. They're also interiors and exteriors, and it was just a way for me to articulate my feelings and emotions during this time. It's about isolation and solitude and family and time. And so here are some of these images. I wanted to add a little bit of humor in because I think that's the only thing that's been like making me sane, is to try to see this in a semi-humorous way. This one is actually a riff on this film by Russian director Tarkovsky called Stalker. And I love that movie. And so I kind of put myself in it. And I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I basically made that image. It's from Stalker. So, so I made a lot of images like that and more. And then I started feeling like I've said it. I don't really have anything else to say, but we're still in COVID. And basically what happened was I've been looking at a lot of art books, a lot of painting, and I started looking at a bunch of different painters, but especially someone named Willem Hammershøi, he's a Danish painter, late 19th century. When I saw his work, and it was so much about these very quiet domestic interiors, you're sort of lost in time. And I just feel so discombobulated being in the pandemic, where every day is the same and time just seems endless. And I kind of wanted to disappear. Also, the news has just been so horrendous. I made this picture on election day because I kind of was afraid to listen to the news, and I just really wanted to escape. So I started a whole body of work sort of based on these very quiet domestic interiors, also with some landscapes that are kind of painterly. This one is kind of based on John Singer Sargent. They're all from behind because or from the side view. I don't want them to be that specific. It's not really about me. It's like I'm someone else in them. And yeah, that's it. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. That was amazing. I was looking through your website before, and yeah, one of the things I noticed was just your use of like using the windows as a source of light. And I love the natural lighting. Is that something that that helps you kind of make the people you visit feel more comfortable? The fact
yeah,
that
I didn't want to bring first of all, I mean, I have used, you know, artificial light. I do have light setups, but I don't like it as much as natural light. And then I didn't want to go to these women's houses with all of that equipment because I wanted it to be really fluid, and that equipment could be sort of intimidating. And I'm really comfortable using natural light. So yes, I did that.
You mentioned having to go back and after months and redo a shoot. Well, how do you know you have the right shot? Like even when you are there, like is there something that just like do you know to continue to go in this direction? And like
Yeah, so this is why I try to do it very slowly, and I take make a lot of images. But sometimes you just instinctually know, it's like, I think I got it, and you move on. And sometimes you do, and then sometimes you just don't. But I think going back is a great thing, and photographing people multiple times is really good if you can do it, because I think the more you know someone and the more you know their story, the better you are maybe to tell it. But sometimes I didn't have the luxury of doing that.
we have a question from the chat from Anna. Do your subjects help you re-see or understand yourself better?
Myself?
Yes, yeah. Do your subjects help you re-see or understand yourself better? Yeah.
I think so, because it's such a give and take. And we talk about, it's actually the most incredible experience. And I always think, even if I don't make a good picture, it doesn't really matter ultimately, because I'm like having the most incredible experience of sharing this intimate, intense moment with the people I photograph. And it's happened in every single occasion, except for maybe one, where the subject has opened up to me so much and has told me so many amazing things and intimate things. And it's just like you leave there like just wanting to hug that person so much, because you just feel so connected to them.
I have a million more questions, but I'm gonna allow you and Samantha, as you're running a little low on time, but maybe Samantha and Sharon, do you have questions for each other about your work?
I actually did have something. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's really a question. It's kind of more of a statement. But so you mentioned at the beginning of your talk that you were trying to like counteract the male gaze or like photograph women in ways that they normally aren't. And whenever I think about going against the male gaze, I think about this quote from Margaret Atwood, which you might know. And I'm just gonna say the last couple lines. Even pretending you aren't catering to male fantasies is a male fantasy. You're unconscious of you're conscious of the ever-present watcher peering through the keyhole in your own head, if nowhere else. You are a woman with a man inside watching a woman. You are your own voyeur. I think about that quote almost every day. And so I was wondering, like, how, I guess there was a question, like, how, like, knowing that there's always a bit of the male gaze internalized inside of you, and like, there'll always be, like, for lack of a better term, like a man inside of you, like watching yourself, like how do you like unconsciously like untangle that and like find these like clearly like female gaze ways to like photograph women? Because like I know I struggle with that with myself sometimes, like even with my own project, I'm like, no, Sam, it's not about being sexy.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I am just trying to make honest photographs, and I'm trying to, you know, go into each situation with a really open mind and not categorize. And I don't know, I mean, it's true, we do internalize everything that we've been seeing and that we've been taught. I don't know. I mean, I'm just hoping that I'm just trying to show my point of view, and it's certainly not every woman's point of view, but I think I'm content in just knowing that it's my point of view. I mean, how do you feel about that?
How do I feel about
photographing with, with like the patriarchy behind you?
Yeah, it's tough because like in a way that also is what I'm trying to do is like take the male gaze and like show like the gross like reality of it. It's like, okay, well, like if you're gonna keep looking at children and girls like they're sexy, then what's gonna happen is that children are gonna be abused. And so like I'll try to like find the way to like show my naked body without sexualizing my naked body. And I'm like, can I ever do that? Like, because I feel like there'll always be someone like, or like a group of people who look at it and they don't see it the way I want to see it. And so like, I guess for me, like I just try to like look at the angles that are normally used and try to like subvert them and like for me, I know that for me, like the post-production work of like coloring is a really big part of it. Like I always try to make the work look like sterile, like almost like hospital like I know I try to like desaturate a lot of the time, like very very cool toned, like very washed out skin. So yeah, I don't know, like it's hard. I try to like do the opposite of everything that I see while also like alluding to it at the same time. So yeah, it's hard to strike that balance, but it's like a very important part of my work, I think.
Have you thought about photographing other women?
I have the first photo with the dart on the legs technically is someone else, although you wouldn't know that because she doesn't have her face in it and we have a similar body type. So most people just assume it is me. I have thought about photographing other people. Obviously, right now I can't. So I've just been trying to put more of myself into it to counteract that, like include more of my face, include more of like, okay, like I've talked about all these things from an objective perspective. Now here's how it's actually affecting a real person. So I'm trying to do more of that. But like if I ever get the opportunity to maybe do like either like a residency or like get a grant or something where I have the funds and the time where I can afford to do that, I would love to like talk to other people who have had like similar experiences and photograph them, or like possibly like make like a photo book or like a fake magazine out of it, because I had to do an assignment for one of my classes where I made like a fake magazine. So I'd love to do that again, but until we're in a post-pandemic world, I'll probably just keep reflecting in on myself for now.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. Yeah, which kind of you kind of did the opposite. You started with everyone else and then you're like, now you're reflecting on yourself.
Great. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you to our artists and for your presentations today. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. This artist talk will be available on the Barrett's YouTube channel tomorrow. And next Thursday, the Barrett will host another talk with 3 more artists from their Photowork show. Photowork will be up in the Barrett in Poughkeepsie, New York through February 20th. So be sure to check it out. Thank you and good night.